Hi everybody and welcome to the next episode of the Microsoft Business IT podcast. My name's Matt Weston, I'm your host, and today I'm going to be talking about automation and really what I consider to be the automation trap, particularly for people who get carried away, and especially from a small business perspective. It could be seen as the go-to or the thing that's going to solve all of our problems. But there are things that we should be considering. Before we do get going into what I consider to be that trap, let's just talk about what automation services we've actually got available within Microsoft 365 at the moment. This is the Microsoft Business IT podcast, so I'm going to focus purely on the Microsoft piece. There are clearly other automation platforms available. Not every organization has to be using Microsoft, but ultimately this is where I spend most of my time. So within Microsoft 365, we have an automation platform called Power Automate. It's more widely known as part of the Power Platform family, which is Power Apps, which is your app builder, Power Automate, your automation solution. You have Power BI, which is loosely part of the Power Platform, but it's more of the data visualization and data reporting element. And then also Power Virtual Agent, or Copilot Studio as it's more commonly known now, which is where we can create our own chatbots. So the whole point around Power Automate and the Power Platform is it's designed and aimed at business users. So anybody with the business pain, if they learn the basics of Power Automate and the wider Power Platform, then realistically they are empowered to go and create the solutions to their problems or to overcome their challenges. Now, this is a very romantic way of looking at this because ultimately, yes, from a simplicity point of view, a business user or anybody can pick this tool up and create something very, very simple. But in order to get the most out of it, you do need to go through the learning curve of learning the ins and outs of the technologies, learning where the limitations are, when to use it, when not to use it, and also making sure that you're not going too far down the line too quickly, that you're also putting the considerations in place first of all. That means that you are going to have a good level of success when you actually get to the point of actually using it in anger. And really, that's the key topic around this element. So Power Automate for me is one of my favorite tools within Microsoft, and I tend to do a huge amount of automation with it. As soon as I get a feel for, actually, there's a new process here, that my mind immediately goes to, how can I automate this? Because as a business owner, then what we're constantly coached and thinking about, how can I get somebody else to do this? How can I get something else to do this? And automation is the go-to, particularly for me, because I can offload a lot of my manual tasks. 60% of our tasks on a weekly basis are repeatable tasks. They are things that we just do. We are just cranking the handle to keep things moving. And so automation is where my mind always goes to, and I'm almost a victim of my own my own messaging around this, because I always use the statistic: if I can save 10 minutes a day, I'm going to save a week over the year, and I find that drives me too far too quickly down an automation route. So whilst we do a lot of automation, and automation is a great thing. Don't get me wrong, it is brilliant. It's such a good way of being able to just get rid of those manual tasks, those little tasks that just eat time, that I don't necessarily need to do to add value to my day. But I need to do it just out of necessity. So the automation piece is there. But before we get to that point, we have to be very aware that there are steps to get us there. And I was attending effectively a brief a few weeks ago, and There was a member of the armed forces who was there. He was presenting, and I loved the way that he articulated the thought process to get to the point of automation. And I've taken that on board now, and I'm starting to use this in my own material, in my own thinking. And the steps that we need to get there are, regardless of the process, we need to simplify it, we need to standardize it, we need to orchestrate it, and then we can automate it. And it may not be quite a linear path, as we'll find out as we start to explore these. So before we can automate a process, we have to have a process in place in the first instance. So I'm going to take as an example my HR onboarding process. So my HR onboarding process, I've now automated within an inch of its life because I've gone through these steps and taken out a lot of the manual effort involved in this. So when I first started thinking about onboarding new members of staff, I created the process. Now, that was the most important thing for me to do at the time. Because if you listen to any of the other podcasts that I've recommended in the past, such as the A Players podcast with Lewis Hayden, he will talk about building leverage. Leverage means that I can still do this, I can do more work, but doing less myself, and actually utilize the skills and the capabilities and the capacity of other people to allow us to operate at a higher level. So that is the whole concept of leverage. It's not me doing it, it's somebody else. Now, in order for me to do that, I have to have the process written down. I have to be able to articulate what is the start, what is the end, what are the steps that we are going through. If I don't have that, then it's completely down to interpretation. It's completely down to, I think we should be doing this next, or this next, or this next, or actually, you know what, I'm not going to do that, or I've forgotten to do that bit. That's the one that scares me the most. So we created the process. Then, as part of creating the process and actually seeing it written down, you can then do some analysis on it. And that's when really the first part of the first step kicks in, which is simplifying that process. So we can take what is, or on the face of it, quite a complex process, and because we're then mapping it, we can see, where are we duplicating effort? What happens if we move it around slightly? What happens if somebody else does that bit rather than this person? We can simplify it, or can we consolidate actions together so it becomes one action? So we simplify the process as much as possible. Simple processes are a lot more effective than complex ones. And I know that seems like I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but the number of overly complex and overly engineered processes that I see, that when we start thinking about it, can be radically simplified. Simple processes, people will buy into it. People will do it because it's easier to follow the process than to not follow the process. That's got to be a recipe for success. If what you're asking them to do is easier than the way that they were doing it through their own interpretations. So we simplify, we make our route, our process, the way of doing it, and easier than any other. So we've simplified it, we can then standardize it. So we standardize it, we communicate it out, and then people follow that process. And they go through the same checkboxes, they go through the same quality gates, they go through the same checks and balances every single time. It becomes a standard process. Because it becomes standard, it also means that we can always skip back to the simplification piece, because maybe when we first tried to simplify it, we'd missed something out, or now that we're trying it, actually needs some revision. And there's nothing wrong with us going back and revising that first step, or revising the process. And because we are doing it manually at the moment, we've got people physically doing it, whether it's me, whether it's my Leighton, my ops manager, or whoever else it might be, then ultimately we're testing it, and we're standardizing it, and we're all working in the same way. And my business coach, Lewis Hayden, he always uses McDonald's as a great example of this standardization piece. Because in McDonald's, you get taken on as a new member of staff, and you get given the handbook. And that handbook tells you how to do step by step, how to create the burger, how to prepare the fries, how to do the McFlurry, whatever it might be. So it doesn't matter if I'm an employee who has previously worked for KFC and I know how to make fried chicken. When I come into McDonald's, I take that process that's been written down, it's been communicated to me, and I follow it. It is standardized. So I know that whether it's me making the burger or one of my colleagues or somebody new coming in, it's always going to be the same. So the standardization aspect is, again, key. It's going to inform this, whether we've made the right decisions in the simplification process. But then once we've standardized it, we can then orchestrate it. Now, this is quite a nice term for just managing the process. Is it working? Is it time efficient? Is it meaning we get from A to B with the same result every single time? Are there things that we hadn't considered? Again, it means that we can constantly go around in this loop. But it's being managed, which means it's got someone looking after the process. That is what a manager is there for. A manager manages the process. I might create the process. I might hand that over to my sales manager. The sales manager then manages the process, and everybody follows that process. So the orchestration piece is it's managing that process through. And again, we may loop back to simplification. We change something, we simplify it, we then standardize it. It becomes part and parcel of the new handbook that goes out, and then again we orchestrate it. Now, I have now started to let things bed in at this point. So the previous Matt Weston, before I really started to tackle this, and I fell into the trap of going too quickly into the automation piece, the next step, because I hadn't proven that this process was the right process, that we got the right steps, that we got the right inputs, the right outputs, the right touch points. So without all of these in place, being the technical geek that I am, I would just go, right, you know what, I'm going to go and automate that straight away. And then effectively what I'm doing by automating it too soon is tying us in to a process that may not be the right process. It might not be the most efficient. It might not be giving me the results or the consistency or the outcomes that I want. So effectively, the orchestration piece is going to give me my gate. Is this the right thing to do? Once we've actually let that bed in for a while, then at that point, then we can look at the automation piece. So now I can start to look at my process because we've got it written down, we've got it mapped, we know who's doing what and when, how much time it's taking them, and so on. We're getting some really great information about what our process looks like. Now that I've got this, we can start to look at, okay, where are the points that really we don't need to have a human doing this? There's usually an email that goes out at some point in the process. Can that part be automated? If that's going to be automated, what's that going to save me? If it's going away and finding some information from one of our other systems and pulling that information in, creating the email and then sending it, you know what, it could save me anything between 10 and 15 minutes, depending on how long it takes me to go and find that info. So at that point, the automation is becoming an enabler to the process, not the process itself. So it's looking to be to what can we offload? What doesn't need to be done by a human? And this is where ultimately automation then takes over. It starts to then drive efficiency. It starts to enforce the consistency. Because if it's not a human doing it, there's no room for error. It's going to follow the same process every single time in the same way. And in a number of seconds, rather than potentially minutes or hours to go and do that same process. So ultimately, having the automation piece there is definitely this next step. And this is the right place to do it. And if we start thinking about building our processes up in this way, if we start thinking about going through the testing, the build, the test, the adjust, and then the automation is going to be much more effective. Like I say, I'm speaking from a lot of experience here, even being someone who does automation day in, day out. I've rushed through these steps and it's bitten me. So go through these steps, and then at that point, you can then look to Power Automate to then start looking at how do we make those time savings. And ultimately, once you've got to that automation step, you know what, you can start to put an ROI against that as well. Because as an example, I mentioned my employee onboarding process earlier on. That used to take me between 6 and 9 hours for me to go through every single step of that process, from the point of creating and generating offer letters to contracts to getting them signed to setting up users in my Microsoft 365 tenancy. My touch points now in there are 30 minutes. So 6 hours of my hourly rate compared to half an hour of my hourly rate. That's a big saving that I can tangibly put numbers against. But the only way that you're going to get the benefits from that is by going through the process. The process to create the process. Simplify it. Well, write it down first of all. Simplify it. Standardize it. Make sure it's right. Make sure it's being followed. Make sure it's being communicated. Orchestrate it. Let it bed in. Do it manually still for a time being, because you are going to keep getting information about your process. Is it the right process? Keep asking yourself. Is it? Have I got the right people involved at the right time? And then when you can comfortably say yes and that process is being followed, then go to the automation piece. Go to Power Automate, and there are some great resources out there if you want to learn more about Power Automate, or DM me on LinkedIn or Facebook, wherever you are connected with me, or even on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube, and I will send you some resources about what Power Automate is and how it can help you. But otherwise, don't fall into the automation trap. It's exciting, but don't go too quickly through this process, because otherwise it will have a detrimental effect on what you are trying to achieve. And now, speaking again as a business owner, the more setbacks that you have, the more it hinders your pace, your growth, your movement towards your end goals. So there we go. That's my insight into what I call the automation trap. I hope that was useful. If you do have any questions, please do reach out to me. If you think somebody else could be benefiting from this, especially through that process, please do share this podcast episode with them, because the whole point of this is for me to be able to help people, and especially from a business perspective, not necessarily making the same mistakes that I've made in the past. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and I will look forward to speaking to you again on the next episode.